Welcome to the National Women's Fitness Academy podcast. We're here to talk about women's health, female hormones, body image, and all things health and fitness.
Hello, girls, and welcome to another episode of the Women's Fitness Academy's podcast. I'm your host, Siggy, one of the WFA's educators and a women's online coach. Today, I've got a special guest. Her name is Nat. Nat, thank you so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad that I was able to schedule you in for this time to have a chat about all women's health and hormones. Now, Nat, could you please tell our listeners about, a little bit about your credentials and what inspired you to become a women's health practitioner?
Yeah, of course. So my background is Chinese medicine. I studied both Chinese herbal medicine and acupuncture. And another degree in biosciences back in the day, which were polar ends apart, to be quite honest. Really had to unlearn one to learn the other. But really, that didn't set up a foundation for women's health. It was more based on patient needs over time. And really, when women started asking questions that I couldn't answer, I needed to find out answers. And it wasn't that I just couldn't answer their questions. It was that nobody was answering their questions. And I guess fast forward a few years and really me being able to see a direct correlation between the symptoms that they were experiencing and their modern lifestyle. And medicine and science just hadn't caught up yet. And this is, I'm talking, nearly 20 years ago. I've been a practitioner for 17 years. So, it was very much learning for all of us together. And I think that's actually a beautiful place to exist. As a new practitioner, you think you need to know everything, and actually it's just beginning in terms of what you're going to learn. And so I got to go on that path and that journey with my patients at the time and be really honest and saying, all right, let's learn this together, because I don't have the answers. My tertiary education, my gynecological studies, nothing had prepared me for any of this, even though I'd studied gynecology and I'd studied the body in great detail. The changes we're seeing with women's hormones, like I said, they were a direct result of modern living. And so we needed to find them solutions that were actually sustainable rather than just treating the symptom itself, which medicine loves to do. And there's nothing wrong with that as a short-term solution. But how do we look at the bigger picture? And how do we look at the long game when it comes to our health as women? Not to mention the fact that we're cyclic and constantly changing. So let's throw that in the mix as well. And it makes for a little bit of, my career's never going to go anywhere, that's for sure. But little did I know that at the time. And we've just been really blessed to be able to be at the forefront of this sort of space for women and continue to do that. And I've done that for long enough to know some stuff, and still got a long way to go in terms of learning more, because we are constantly finding out more information when it comes to this area.
So true. Like constantly evolving, like information changes, research comes up, and not only that, I'm sure like when you see patients, they're constantly asking you newer questions and like trigger something that you may or may not know. And you're like, cool, what can I learn next? What can I do? And like you said, from being in the industry for over 17 years, like that is so freaking cool, because that just shows that there's probably like already a flora of information that you know about. But like you said, we're constant progressing. Like if there's something that you don't know, you can go out there and learn about it. And I think that's such a good way to look about things, because some people are very closed-minded when they become a certain professional or practitioner. They think they know it all. It's just like, well, you don't actually.
Well, totally. But it can also be on the other side of the coin, where you've got a diagnosis as a patient and then you are closed-minded in looking at ways of treating it other than what, there can't be one way to treat everything. That's just hideous, right? And so being open-minded once you've got a diagnosis, or what the challenges actually are, as to various ways of treating it. And so I think it goes both ways. Patients and the provider, we can all continue to learn and grow, and that's what this is all about. Patients are something that as providers we practice on. We are practicing and learning and growing. So being open to that, I think that's the recipe for a evolving practitioner.
Yes, that's so true. And you know what? I love that you mentioned that, because it does start with us, from our personal experience, whether it's like training, nutrition, like obviously right now we're talking more about women's health and hormones. But with your own history, like before you became a practitioner, what was your history around, your cycle, your hormones?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely did have some challenges. It wasn't why I got into this area. In fact, I was adamant that I was not going to treat women's health. I was like, hormonal women are crazy and I don't want to see them. Like, really, who wants to do that 24/7? I don't. Let's be honest. If you really think about it, you are different every single day of your cycle.
Yeah.
And so you just don't know what you're going to get on any given day, really. But I certainly had a history of extreme period pain. I had cycles where I know I was on the floor vomiting. I was vomiting from pain, passing out. And, I remember one particular period that I had pressing my face against the bathroom tiles on the floor, trying to get relief because the sweats that I was experiencing were so bad, and I kept passing out from the pain. So, I never had a diagnosis, but I would now, if a patient came to me and was constantly in that much pain, that to me would be a scenario where I would suggest to, let's see if you've got endometriosis. That's definitely where I would be pushing that patient. So that was me. And, I had not always had terrible periods. In fact, they didn't get bad until I moved away from home. I grew up in a house where healthcare was, and natural healthcare was a high priority. My mum was very invested in looking after us nutritionally. We grew up very active, and so that's what I knew. And I moved away from home to study and probably did every single wrong thing that I could do to turn those things on to it for me to experience endometriosis. I think the fact is I would be genetically predisposed. Anyone that's got a condition is genetically predisposed, but that doesn't mean you have to experience the condition. It's having enough factors within your environment that turn your genes on to behave a certain way. And my job is actually to turn them off so that you don't experience those symptoms. But I think it paints a really nice picture that I moved away from home. I can vouch for the fact that I ate KFC probably every day for 2 years. I wasn't moving my body. I'd gone from a lot of exercise to nothing at all. And I just probably was burning the candle at both ends and not looking after myself. And so it's not any wonder that my body was screaming at me that this wasn't working. And I remember one day looking in the mirror, I'd gained a lot of weight, and it wasn't about the periods. It was about how I felt in my body in terms of just feeling puffy and overweight and unhappy at what I saw in the mirror. And that was my motivation to do something about it. And so I joined the gym and I adjusted my diet, and I was, probably 20 at this point in time. And lo and behold, my periods improved, and I still didn't make that connection. I didn't make that connection for many years. My skin improved, my periods improved, my mood improved, my body shape changed. I, grew muscle, lost weight, and felt good. And of course, what's nice when that happens is everyone tells you how great you look, so you keep doing it. And that was really a turning point for me in getting my, body back to a position where it was able to perform better. Because what it was, the opposite is I was creating an environment for it to do the exact opposite. So that was my history and my story. And then being able to connect those dots only later in terms of the changes that I was able to make to support my body better, and having a side effect being better and happier hormones. That was great. And being able to now at least even just tell that short story. I think a lot of us don't realize that our symptoms are our body's way of expressing whatever it can to do the best it can under the circumstances, even if they're debilitating. So it can also be confronting to learn, because we can think, what do you mean? You're telling me this is my fault? It's like, yeah.
It is. Yeah. Oh my God. I can totally relate to that. And I'm so glad that you opened up expressing your history of PMS, because I was in a really similar position to you, like literally next to the toilet with the pain, with the sweat, and trying to figure out like, why am I experiencing these pains? And back then I didn't have the answers, and the only answer I got was go on the pill. That will fix what the issue is. And now with all the information we have right now, we know that the treatment for having those PMS symptoms or whatever it is I went through, like, you know, it was the pill, but it wasn't necessarily helping me. It was just masking the issue. And then once I came off it, guess what happened? All those symptoms came back, all the acne, the pain, you know, the PCOS symptoms that I thought I didn't have, but obviously I did. So yeah, like, you know, so many of us associate with PMS pains thinking it is the norm, and we report it as if it's just like a normal thing. But a lot of us need to understand that, yes, it's very common, but it's not normal.
100%. I mean, it's a symptom. And if I always say, if I firstly remember my mum saying to me, it just sucks to be a woman, I'm so sorry. And that was the answer. That's what you got because you were a female. But I also think that if you put the shoe on the other sex, so to speak, and, you know, a male had a pain in the end of his penis at the same time every month, he'd damn well do something about it, or his wife or partner would make him do something about it. And so, you know, it's very interesting that we've categorized women as experiencing pain, and that's just the way that it goes. Too bad, so sad, suck it up, princess. So I think this is revolutionary, firstly, to a lot of people to even hear that they don't have to experience pain. I think also, just to speak to your experience with the pill, I mean, if you are experiencing debilitating pain and you don't have answers and you're not sure what to do, I don't think that as a short-term solution, maybe that can actually create a breath of fresh air for you to be able to collect yourself together and work out what the heck's going on and how am I going to treat this. The problem is that there's no long-term strategy. You know, handing someone a pill packet is not a long-term strategy. Inserting a Mirena, it's not a long-term strategy. And you need to think about an exit strategy at some point, because you can't stay on it forever, because in my experience, the symptoms creep back, and they creep back tenfold because the hormone imbalance that's underlying hasn't been treated. You've just blanketed the symptoms to stop it from getting worse. And often you don't have symptoms, but the minute, like you said, that you transition off birth control, the symptoms come rushing back, and often 10 times worse. So, and the other challenge is that any medication, it really wears away our vitamin and mineral stores. It depletes our gut health. It does imbalance our bodies and therefore our hormones. And we can be left feeling pretty darn lost at the end of all of that. So it's not that I would say don't do that. That would be also dangerous. And if you are currently taking birth control, I'd really encourage you to look at what were the symptoms prior to you taking birth control, and what can they teach you about yourself so that you can actually go and create a foundation for when you are ready to transition off. And that's the part that's missing in diagnosis and treatment, is we don't look at everything else around us, like I was talking about before. All of those external factors, the environment, your routine, your nutrition, your emotions, like there's so many things that feed. All of these things are just stresses at the end of the day, you know. Yeah. So you've got enough stresses in your life to turn these conditions on. We need to identify the stresses and manage them better to be able to step things back and manage a hormone imbalance or manage a condition, and then hopefully get you to a point where we can put you into a state of recovery, which means you don't actually even need to worry about those symptoms anymore. I don't have painful periods anymore.
Yeah.
In fact, we're all different, and I'd love to talk about body literacy and cycle awareness, but that's a peak performance time for me. Once I get my period, I'm ready to go. In the lead up, not so much. I don't have horrible symptoms. I just need to take care of myself a little bit better, because the nature of a period is a massive event. Like it's, and unfortunately as women, we are still living in a world where a lot of people expect us to behave like men, and we're not men.
We're not.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
So that's the problem also, is changing the mindset around this and allowing you to scaffold around your cycle so that you can use it to your advantage. You don't need to act like a man, and you don't need to perform the same way every day, because your body's not designed to do that anyway.
I love that you mentioned that, because I literally had a similar conversation to this with a client, expressing to her, because as women, even as a society, but we're predominantly speaking about women, we are naturally needing to be feminine, nurturing, caring, giving, loving, but we're so focused on being a masculine dominant in everything that we do: training, work, taking care of people. It's just like go, go, go. So it's no wonder we have extra stresses on our body that do affect our PMS and our periods. And I love that you mentioned that, because I really think we need to dive a little bit deeper into that for our listeners to understand that, hey, we actually need to be more present in what's going on within our bodies.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we do. And this is where I talk about cycle awareness, and knowing where you are in your cycle is a game changer. And knowing, like I touched on, that every day is different. Every single day, if you have a 28-day cycle, or however long your cycle is, you're not the same as you were yesterday, and you won't be the same tomorrow. And that's just because of where your hormone levels are on any given day. So knowing this information and observing it over time, you can use it to your advantage. So, in a textbook case scenario, usually within the window of the period is a time to take it easy. You're bleeding, there's a lot going on, there's a lot of energy expended in your reproductive organs, and that means that there may or may not be leftovers for anything else that needs to function, depending on your own genetics and the way that you are, constitution. So that's important. And then I liken it to the seasons. This is the best way that I can talk about it. That's the winter phase. And then once we've come out of winter, we're in spring. This is the building phase, where we get to actually create goals and, be able to plan and get excited. And it's springtime. It's new growth. It's also when you're growing your endometrium and your lining, and your hormones are starting to rise and get to that peak. And then there's the mid-cycle, which is summer, and that's likened to ovulation. It's likened to summer, but it's in the ovulation window where we can execute these goals. This is where we're firing. We get a surge of testosterone. We are social. We want to be out there. We want to, if you can time a presentation on the day you're ovulating, you're going to nail it, right? Right. And then we come down the other side of that. So that's, coming into the premenstrual and menstrual window again. It's where we're getting ready to shed. So it's like autumn, where, the leaves are going to fall off the trees, and we get into that downward phase, and we still can bring it. We can still execute goals, and we can still get things done. But we are moving into a phase where we probably need to just pull it back a notch for a few days. And so just knowing this means that if you had to perform on the day of the first day of your cycle, for example, it means identifying where you are in your cycle, and to then be able to perform. We literally don't do anything else but that one thing to get us to perform on that day. So do you need to sleep a little bit better? Do you need to dial your nutrition in on that day? And that's literally all you need to do to still be able to perform on that day. And I think knowing this changes the game. It means you're kinder on yourself. You can actually plan around it, and know it means, some days you wake up and you're like, today's just not the day. And I have a personal trainer. He's a male. I can't expect him to get it. I have to teach him. I have to say it's not the day. And he'll be like, oh, you know what personal trainers are like too. No, come on, you're here. We're going to get it done. No, it's not that day. You're just lucky that I'm here. I am here to. Yeah, it's like, that's not what's happening today. But like I said it before, I know my cycle, and literally my downtime needs to be in that PMS window. In the 2 or 3 days leading up to the period is when I really need to dial it back, and I really need to rest. I need to eat a little bit more. I need to sleep a little bit more. And then once I actually get my period, I'm ready to go. I'm like, I will lift something heavy on that day, which is not everybody's thing, but I know that that's the day I feel ready to do that. And so even just knowing this about myself is allows me to excuse myself when I don't feel like I can bring it because I know why, but also not create excuses when I'm not in that phase, when I actually can bring it, because we're human as well in amongst all of that.
Exactly. Oh my God. I can relate to all of those seasons, seriously. And I love that you mentioned that putting a presentation together during that ovulation period, because you're at your max peak of feeling the absolute best. And I also encourage a lot of coaches, you know, making sale calls or like talking to clients, like have it during that period where you're actually very alert. Your body is wanting to socialize with more people, where, you know, when it comes to that autumn season, as you mentioned, like coming towards that period, you're wanting to like have that downtime, you know, just relax, do you kind of thing. I love
also, we can work smarter and not harder. Like, I think as women, even if you dialed it into those 4 days, let's say around ovulation, and you just brought it, you could probably relax for the rest of the month.
Yeah. True. So true. I love that concept around how you mentioned also our hormones change on a daily basis. You know, we've been taught from, you know, not school. At school, I didn't get taught any of this, which is it's a shame. I hope it changes over time. But we've been told that it goes through the 4 stages, where now you're saying it's every day, it's changing.
Well, we've got cycles within cycles, don't we? We have a 24-hour cycle. We have a 28-day cycle. We then exist in seasons. And then the other thing that we've got to throw in the mix is cortisol, and that's our stress hormone, which can impact all other hormones because it's designed to save you in a need of fight or flight. That's what it's there to do. So add that to the mix, and that pulls the handbrake on everything. So we absolutely exist cycles within cycles, and men don't have this. So this is why we've got to talk about it and create the awareness, because if we're behaving every single day, trying to behave the same every single day, you're only going to be disappointed, and then you're going to feel like you're constantly failing.
Yeah, and it's exhausting to try and pretend that you're okay when you're not okay. And I think this is really important for a lot of women to have more body literacy around their cycle, to understand that, hey, like you said, like yesterday was a great day. I smashed my workout. But today when I see my PT, I'm going to have to take it easy. I do not feel my best.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I love that. Now, in terms of ovulation, I know before we started recording, we were talking about how ovulation is the start of our cycles. However, many think that the period is.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, you can't have a period without ovulating. And if you are getting a bleed and not ovulating, then that's something to look at, because an ovulatory cycle, which means you haven't ovulated, indicates that your hormones aren't where they need to be. So, and there can be many reasons why that's happening. But I mean, how do you know if you're ovulating or not? Hopefully you see evidence of that with changes throughout your cycle. And I don't want you to be in pain when you're ovulating either. Yeah. You should feel good at ovulation. You should look in the mirror. That's the day you look in the mirror and you're like, I look good today. It's the day that you have a good hair day. It's the day where you also might feel like your libido is heightened, and that's not a design fault. That's all grand design. Like, you know, we ovulate to procreate, and if you don't so conceive at that time, then the whole process repeats over. That's what the period is, shedding the lining to get ready again for ovulation. Truthfully, your body's constantly setting you up to fall pregnant. It's not a trick. It's actually how it's designed. And it doesn't mean you have to fall pregnant. We fear pregnancy. We fear fertility. But fertility, to me, the word fertility doesn't mean pregnancy. It's the potential to conceive. Yeah. And that means a healthy reproductive system. So, you know, we spend the majority of our life trying not to fall pregnant, only to find out that it's not as easy as we necessarily think it is. And if we have this cycle awareness and we understand that ovulation is the star, then we can also do what we need to do to either avoid pregnancy, which is not that difficult. I've been practicing fertility awareness method for many years, 20 or so years. Wow. And I have two children. They were conceived the month that we tried. And I don't tell you this because I think I'm a hero. I tell you this because this is my job to teach women this, and I would hope that would be my experience. So, everything does point towards ovulation in terms of preparation for conception, and your hormones do come to a big point at that time. But also you should see changes in your cervical fluid as well that allow you to see that you are ovulating as well. And if you're not seeing any of these things, and then your period or you're getting a bleed is not a period, so it's not a flow that you actually see over several days, that's another way of knowing if you're ovulating or not as well. If you're not seeing a flow with the period and it's sort of more of a, that's a bit strange, it's very dry, it's very sort of stop-starty, murky, kind of just not proper, that's another way of knowing that as well. Your period should be a flow over 3 to 5 days where you actually really see, you need to actually be attending to it, not just leaving it to be, if you've got a flow or not. And you can't make many hormones, especially progesterone, which is such an important hormone to be releasing. You can't make that also if you haven't ovulated, because the site of where ovulation occurs, that's where the follicle comes away from the ovary, becomes its own little organ for 2 weeks where it produces progesterone to support that second part of the cycle. So if you haven't ovulated, you're not producing progesterone, and that can be problematic for lots of reasons as well. And having your progesterone in balance with the rest of your hormones feels good. Progesterone, it's a natural diuretic. It's calming. We need it for our sleep and bones. And for many, many things, we require that, not just the support of the second part of the cycle. We are rhythmic beings. So with that in mind, it's really important to work out, am I ovulating? When am I ovulating? For fertility awareness reasons. And then also knowing that you're seeing a proper period allows you to also confirm that.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned around the fertility awareness method. I'm not sure what method you use, but like a lot of clients that come to me, they're like, oh yeah, my app says I'm ovulating. And I'm like, but are you actually?
No, we don't rely on apps. Apps are disaster. The app will predict when it thinks you are going to ovulate based on your last cycle. It's basically guessing. And if you have a regular 28-day cycle, then maybe it will be somewhat correct. But unless you're inputting data into a device or into an app, and data being generally basal body temperature, unless you're tracking with blood tests, which unless you're trying to have a baby, you're probably not doing. And it's not necessary unless that's the scenario where you're tracking ovulation because you suspect maybe you're not ovulating. You really need to be inputting basal body temperature, and that's not as easy as you might think. It takes years to actually understand basal body temperature, and we're not taught this as kids. So there are some great devices out there that allow you to track that, to then have that fertility awareness. Now, I spent years not using a device to track fertility, but I now actually have a vested interest in a company that in Australia that does that. But there are various devices. Our company is the Daisy, and it's been evolved over 40 years of technology. So that to me is a lot of peace of mind when you've got an app and a device that's able to track your fertility for you. Also particularly useful if you've been on the pill and you've come off it, and some women have been on the pill since they were 16. Their fertility awareness would be such a daunting task if you didn't have that, data and years of understanding about your body. So this is where fertility tracking devices can become particularly important to take the guesswork out of it for you. It's far less to do with conception for most women and far more to do with awareness around cycles so that you can do what you want with it. Essentially, even this understanding we were talking about before and knowing where you are in your cycle is still something that I look at and track now. I track mine now, but I didn't used to. I just could tell when I was ovulating. I think also as we get older, our cycles change again, and that's, they start to fluctuate. They don't go missing. You're not in menopause, but perimenopause starts from 35. So, with that information in mind, we need to watch what our cycles do and the fluctuations that start to occur, where once we had, say, a regular 28-day cycle, all of a sudden you're seeing a variance somewhere between 23 to 40 days. And that's not that's not abnormal. That's actually what happens as we move through into perimenopause. But knowing that information can be really useful as well.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that there's the different cycles, because like from a kid to a teenager to being in 20s to the 30s, it changes over time. And like you said before, we have cycles within cycles and within cycles. But yeah, back onto that fertility awareness method. Yeah, the app one, it's a tricky one, because everyone's like, yeah, I'm going to use it. It's going to tell me, give me all the answers. It's just like, no, you need to do it properly. Like, track it, like, you know, with the vaginal mucus, your body temperature. It just depends on how heavily invested you want to go about it. But just like you said, Nat, we want to start building more body literacy around it, so we don't have to rely on technology to tell us where we're at. You can literally just wake up and be like, cool, this is happening. I know what to do.
100%. And I think that's, like I said, once you can tie the two together, and if you were to use a tracking device for a period of time and then decide not to, you've learnt your body whilst it's sort of helped you confirm what you are seeing, which is really nice as well.
Yeah, freaking love that. When we're looking at, you know, we spoke before about fertility, how most women look at it as just, you know, for making babies. We also want to make them realize that it's not just for making babies.
Oh, 100%. It's far less about making babies than anything. I mean, I don't know about you, but there's only 2 times in my life I was interested in making babies, and the rest of the time I have not been interested in that. So I spend far more time utilizing my cycle to my advantage than I do trying to have a baby. But at the same time, like I said, when I was ready to have children, that came easily because my body was in a position to allow that to happen. And so being able to track and look at what your cycles are doing allows you to work out where your fertility stance also is. And that can be a game changer as well, because a lot of women nowadays, we set ourselves up to fail. We set ourselves up to think that we aren't going to be able to fall pregnant based on the majority of women having some type of struggle around it because they didn't have this information. They've never looked into what their body's doing. And all of a sudden, they've got to learn everything, or they come off the pill or their Mirena taken out, and then they're starting at the beginning. The other thing I do think it's important to understand is that the age that our sex hormones don't mature until around the age of 21. Mm-hmm. Many women start on birth control far younger than that. So let's use the example of, say, being a 16-year-old and going on the pill. When you transition off the pill, and say you do that, let's say you're 26 and you're like, do you know what? This is not serving me. I know I need to stop taking it. It doesn't feel good anymore for me. Now I need to find another solution. You are as sexually mature, hormone speaking, as your 16-year-old self. So if you had challenges at 16, no wonder they come back. But also if you didn't have a period by 16 and you went on birth control to give you a period, which I hate to break it to you, but that's not what it's doing. You are starting as your 16-year-old self once you transition off. So it's going to take some work to get that back on track again. Or if it wasn't ever on the track, we've got to get it on there in the first place. So, you know, this is the information that was missing for a lot of women. So they've never had to know this before. And it can feel very scary to go down this path. But I do encourage women, you know, to really look at the history, work out what's happened for them, to be able to create a path moving forward. It may mean that you don't yet transition off the pill. It might mean that you stay on there for a little period of time until we get things sorted. But it is one of the best things that you can ever do is look at your cycle and balance your hormones.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. Like, I went on the pill when I was 14. I was 14 when I was on the pill, and I didn't get off it till I was about 24, 25. So right. Now that you're like, oh, you know, if, you know, went on at 16 and then came off it, you will have the same symptoms that you had back then. And just thinking back, it's just like, whoa, that is such a big slap in the face, because I'm like, I literally felt as if I was 14 again when I was in my mid-20s having all these symptoms. And I really like the fact that you mentioned about transitioning off it, but not just completely coming off it. It's actually seeing a professional like yourself and going through the protocols of how to help you to come off it so you can naturally feel better and not having these bad symptoms.
Also, it's, give you some confidence as well. A lot of women went on the pill because they had horrific acne. And so they're so scared to come off because they're like, I don't want to have acne as a 32-year-old. Like, that's horrible. And nor should you. So it's actually treating the underlying imbalance that will still be there if you haven't done anything to fix it, and treating that first so that you can have the confidence that you're not going to stop taking the pill and 6 months later, your teenage acne comes rushing back.
Yeah, it doesn't happen like that.
No, right?
No. What are some, I know like it's different for every individual, but what are some protocols that you would help someone coming off the pill, or maybe supplementation?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, like we said at the beginning, the pill or any medication really disrupts gut function. So focusing and starting there for everybody is really safe. I also say that, anything that I talk about publicly in a public space is going to generally be safe for anyone to do. Whereas if you need specialized care, that's, in a one-on-one consultation, that's going to be very dialed in, and that's not for everyone. So I can't stand here and say everyone needs to take inositol, for example, which is going to help to regulate your blood sugar if you don't have insulin resistance or PCOS or elevated androgens. Like, that doesn't make sense. So what we can say safely is we know that the pill disrupts gut function, gut integrity. It depletes vitamin and mineral stores. It upsets absorption, and can really be problematic when it comes to that. That then flows onto inflammation, autoimmune conditions right there. So you're taking out a big portion of people. You're caring for a big portion of people from a very small step, just by looking at gut health alone. So how do we do that? Well, I don't think it's not genius to say pre and probiotics are really important in supporting gut flora and gut integrity. We look at collagen and zinc to help the gut wall remain nice and strong, the junctions to remain nice and strong between the cells. That's going to help with inflammation and autoimmune conditions. And bearing in mind that acne is an autoimmune condition, or can be, so can endometriosis, so can eczema, So I think that's important. And then just looking at how do we support vitamin and mineral stores? Well, I don't think you can supplement a good diet, but so nutrition is key. But I would recommend for anyone on the pill to definitely be on a multivitamin, multi-mineral, and probably some fish oil as well, and start with that. When it comes to nutrients, what we eat is either of benefit or deficit. It's going to either take us to a state of inflammation or not. And we want to try and make your body as least inflamed as possible. And so, creating that anti-inflammatory environment is really important. So this is when it comes to nutrition. It's the good stuff. It's the gluten, the sugar, the dairy that are all inflammatory foods. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have them, but it's probably worthwhile considering how much of those are in your daily regime, and how are they problematic at all. And so just reducing those, which allows you to then naturally have more plants, more fiber, more protein, and good quality carbohydrate and fats. I mean, fats actually are the hero, to be quite honest, but we're scared of fats.
Yeah, being told that fat is fat.
Well, your hormones are made of fat and protein. So if you're not eating enough fat and protein, then you are not building, you don't have the building blocks for your hormones. So as a 101, start there if you haven't done anything else. But I will say one more thing when it comes to gut health, and this is the one that I feel is one of the biggest factors, and that is stress levels. And it's the one that's often not addressed. I think we accept that. We need to eat better. We need to, sleep enough. We need to look after ourselves. We need to exercise and move. But when it comes to stress is inflammatory as well. Stress has an impact on the gut, just like taking antibiotics or medications. And so how do we do that? That's the hard one. And I say to patients, if I sat here and said, I just need you to not stress, you'd be like, oh, that's great. I'll punch you in the face, because seriously, it's like when someone tells you to relax, you literally do.
Oh my God, I can't stand when people just calm down.
Just calm down or just relax. It's like, listen here, now you've just set my cortisol higher than what it was before.
Yeah, exactly.
What I want people to do is to be able to recognize when they are in overwhelm or stress. Simply acknowledge, Nat, you're feeling stressed right now. It's all you got to do. It's all I ask anyone to do, is acknowledge the fact that they are stressed in any moment. And that what that allows you to do is create pockets of awareness within your day where you are aware of the state that you're in. And the more that you can be aware of the state that you're in, the more you can do something about it. So it's more about acknowledging it. And then once you start to get aware of that, as a next layer to that, you can ask yourself, okay, what can I do with this right now? And sometimes it's a matter of just feeling stressed, like actually allow yourself to feel stressed. Our emotions last for around 90 seconds. So what happens if you just literally felt really stressed for 90 seconds? I promise you it'd pass. But we push it away. We keep on going. We keep on we keep on plowing through, not acknowledging how we're feeling, and that becomes a problem over time. So just acknowledge when you're in overwhelm and see how many times you actually can acknowledge that you feel like that in a day as a starting point, so that you can start to do something different moving forward.
That is so helpful, because building that mental toughness around the stressful times is such a helpful tool, because like you said, so many of us are stressed, but we end up just pushing it down or under a rug, not actually dealing with what's going on. So then it just happens more and more stresses build up and all these things happen. So yeah, it's no wonder people can't just relax, because they're not dealing with the stresses in their lives.
Yeah, exactly. It's just spot on. So we can't do it. We can't do this if we're not aware of it to begin with.
So true. You also mentioned in terms of supplementations, I wanted to also add that magnesium. I know like people always like talk about magnesium, but they don't realize the benefits that magnesium has towards our cycles as well, and relieving stress.
I mean, there are over 350 energy processes that your body requires magnesium for, and everyone is deficient. Our soils don't contain magnesium like they once did, and that is problematic really at the end of the day, because magnesium, yes, we need it to relax smooth muscles. So if you're experiencing pain, whether it's cramping pain or uterine pain or even coughing, it can help with muscle spasm as well, sleep, recovery, stress. You can supplement magnesium according to your stress levels. If you've got the right type and the right dose, and I tend to use not extremely, that's not the word. I use quite high doses of magnesium. It's amazing for helping with moods. It really is the one thing that everybody should have on hand all the time.
Do you have a particular magnesium strand that you suggest? Because again, like there's so many out there.
There really are. I did a post on this not long ago and it went crazy. I was like, I love using the bisglycinate the most because it's fast absorbing. It doesn't send people to the bathroom. I can dose it in high doses. And I've been known to dose that 3 to 4 times a day for patients, especially if they are feeling very overwhelmed. So that's my favorite for those reasons. There are obviously others that are appropriate for various things, but I just find that's appropriate across the board, which is why I tend to use it for patients as well.
Yeah, I've been using magnesium glycinate for like years now, and it's probably the easily absorbed magnesium that I've been using. And like you said, it's been really good for gut health, but also I found it's been quite useful for nerve pain as well.
Right. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, so it has been really good. Yeah. Oh my God, like you from like what we've covered, you can just for our listeners, they can literally just tell like how specific you can be by transitioning off the pill to better your health. And again, if you're not on the pill and you're finding that life has been quite stressful at times, like note down what needs like revisiting. What do you need to change? Like maybe your hormones are playing up because you're so stressed. Like something needs to change, because if you don't change it, you're just going to constantly go through the same cycle and feeling like shit.
Absolutely. And your sex hormones are proportionate to your stress hormones. That's just a survival mechanism. So if your stress hormones are high, your sex hormones will be just scraping the bottom of the barrel just by the nature of homeostasis. So it is very important that we get aware of stresses And stresses aren't just running late or being busy or overwhelmed. It can be, is your gut functioning properly? What is your liver doing? It can be the environment that you live in. It can be toxin exposure. There's so many facets to stress. I need a better word for it, and I don't know what that is. If there's many compartments to stress, I should then maybe say, and I don't think we appreciate the accumulation of all of that has a detrimental effect on our sex hormones by the nature of cortisol comes along and says, everybody, I'm here. You're all going to listen to me right now.
It's so true. Oh my God. I love that you mentioned that. Yeah, you know what, like I'm not going to, sit here and pretend like I'm not stressed. We're all stressed. We all have some form of stress that goes on through life. Like work is stressful. Life right now with COVID is quite stressful. So I wanted to touch point before we finish off about your experience with COVID.
Sure. Yeah. So we had COVID just over 2 months ago. It was a very interesting experience. I describe it as something that didn't feel human. And it really didn't. And it's very interesting. It presented across. So my husband, myself, and my daughter all had COVID, and my son somehow escaped. But we all live under the one roof, so who knows how that happened. I think it speaks to the fact that kids generally fare okay when it comes to COVID, generally speaking, which is nice for parents to be able to see, because it is scary for us to navigate it. And there's a lot of fear. And as we were talking about before we even jumped on here, there's a lot of fear being fed to us by the media, and that's really unfortunate. So, it is a time to curate what you're listening to, I think. But my COVID was very interesting. It started with a lot of pain in my body. I would actually say to the point where I had excruciating pains in my legs that built over several days, to the point where I knew that I didn't feel right. And I was actually at this point isolating, not confirmed with COVID. It just, I just had so much pain, but I had no respiratory symptoms. So I had really no reason. If I had have gone to get tested, they would have said, you're here because you've got leg pain, and eye pain was the other thing that I had. Now they've upgraded those symptoms to be included, but at the time they weren't considered symptoms. And I have a fairly high pain threshold. I'm a pretty strong-minded person. And I was crying on my way to work for a meeting that was a virtual meeting. There wasn't anybody here. And I remember just thinking, how am I going to get through this meeting? Like, I really don't know. So that was probably one of the peak days of my symptoms. And then it did turn to, I had a little bit of respiratory stuff for a few days, but the body pains did continue quite substantially. My daughter had eye pain and congestion. My husband it hit hard in his respiratory. He was quite unwell for an extended period of time. I'm left now still with no smell and very limited taste, which is so boring. And it was funny at first. Like, I was like, oh, look at that. That is a real symptom. Now I'm like, okay, this is starting to frustrate me. And there's some therapies I'm now looking into to try and teach my body how to smell again. But to be honest, it felt like a reset. It felt like a complete reset, and not in necessarily a bad way. It was kind of like, look, I'm in Melbourne, we've been locked up for a long time, and I'd let some, habits come into our house that I kind of was a bit like, okay, how do we break that? And, just in terms of nutrition and movement and all of that, that it allowed us to have a bit of a reset. And so now that we're out the other side, I can safely say that I'm grateful for the experience, because we didn't need any urgent medical attention, which thankfully was, I think testament to, the way that we generally do live our lives. But I also have to say, everyone sort of is sitting back going, how did Melbourne get so bad? Okay, I say literally were the perfect candidates to get COVID. We'd not been moving with sedentary lifestyle. Nobody had been like, in terms of what we need physically, social interaction, to actually thrive as humans.
Sunshine.
None of us had any of that, right? We were, even though you're at home, many of us were, not eating properly, definitely not exercising to our full capacity. it just was a perfect storm as far as I'm concerned. So I feel like that was a contributing factor, and we're never going to know. So we did have a supplement regime that we did stick to, and I think that made a big difference. And I also think that the days where we slackened off on that, I could see a decline in our health momentarily. Again, we're never going to know, but I feel like it really did help, and the research indicates that it does. So look, we're at the other side of it now, and I've just it was very interesting to come back to, I play netball, and that my first game back was like, wow. I had my first PT session today, so I'm sure he went kindly on me, and I feel like I've got a bit of work to do, but at least we did it now. So it was an interesting experience, but it was not all bad. There was some positives that came out of it as well.
So good, so good. And I'm glad that you shared that story with you, because like we mentioned before we started recording, is that, some people fear the fact of, getting this virus, but in essence, it's not as bad as people perceive it to be.
Exactly. And I think that's what's so important. I think it is really taking the fear out of it, doing what you can to do to control it. And illness is inevitable. Like viruses, sickness, on some level, it's inevitable. And it does give us an upgrade, in terms of our immune system. So trying to do everything you can and just hoping that you fare well with all of that. But I do think that there's something to be said about definitely, dialing these things in to support your body as much as you can.
I love that. That could be another topic that we could do.
Yes,
another time.
For sure.
Yeah, totally. I love that. Thank you so much again for your time, Nat. It's been such I'm just looking for the words I'm speechless, obviously, because we've covered so much that I know our listeners are going to be like taking notes going, oh my God, I'm going to have to look into my hormones, the fertility method, being a little bit more body literacy around their cycles, like you mentioned. But to finish off, where can our listeners find you? What platforms are you on?
Yeah, for sure. We have a hormone worksheet on my website, which is just natkringoudis.com, which allows you to kind of profile your symptoms and see what your hormone imbalance might be. So that's something that a lot of people find extremely useful. So I'd highly recommend that you go there. But everything else I do is generally on social media, especially Instagram. I'm Nat Kringoudis there. I love to interact. I love to share information there, and I'm constantly putting information there for people. So that's a good place to start. And of course, my bio over there has all of these links for everything as well. So I'd love to see you over there.
Yes, amazing. Well, girls, I hope you got so much from today. I know I have, that's for sure. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please make sure that you screenshot, tag myself, tag Nat, and tag the Women's Fitness Academy. Until next time, please make sure that you look at balancing your hormones, which will help you balance your life, as Nat says. Till next time, girls. Bye.